It was May 10th in the year 1865 that Jefferson Davis, president of the fallen Confederate government, is captured with his wife and entourage near Irwinville, Georgia, by a detachment of Union General James H. Wilson's cavalry. On April 2nd in 1865, with a Confederate defeat at Petersburg, Virginia, imminent, General Robert E. Lee informed President Davis that he could no longer protect Richmond and advised the Confederate government to evacuate its capital. Davis and his cabinet fled to Danville, Virginia, and with Robert E. Lee's surrender on April 9th, deep into the South. Lee's surrender of his massive army of Northern Virginia effectively ended the Civil War, and during the next few weeks, the remaining Confederate armies surrendered one by one. Davis was devastated by the fall of the Confederacy. Refusing to admit defeat, he hoped to flee to a sympathetic foreign nation such as Britain or France, and was weighing the merits of forming a government in exile when he was arrested by a detachment on the 4th Michigan Cavalry. A certain amount of controversy surrounds his capture, as Davis was wearing his wife's black shawl when the Union troops cornered him. The Northern press ridiculed him as a coward, alleging that he had disguised himself as a woman in an ill-fated attempt to escape. However, Davis, and especially his wife, Verena, maintained that he was ill and that Verena had lent him her shawl to keep his health up during their difficult journey. Imprisoned for 2 years at Fort Monroe, Virginia, because we're not fucking redoing it. Imprisoned for 2 years at Fort Row, Virginia, Davis was indicted for treason, but was never tried. The federal government feared that Davis would be able to prove to a jury that the Southern secession of 1860 to 1861 was legal. Verena worked determinedly to secure his freedom, and in May of 1867, Jefferson Davis was released on bail, with several wealthy Northerners helping him pay off his freedom. After a number of unsuccessful business ventures, he retired to Beauvoir, his home near Biloxi, Mississippi, and began writing his 2-volume memoir, The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government, 1881. He continued his eternity in December of 1889. It was May 10th in 1869 that the presidents of the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads meet in Promontory, Utah, and drive a ceremonial last spike into a rail line that connects their railroads. This made transcontinental railroad travel possible for the first time in our nation. No longer would western-bound travelers need to take the long and dangerous journey by wagon train. Since at least 1832, both eastern and frontier statesmen realized a need to connect the two coasts. It was not until 1853, though, that Congress appropriated funds to survey several routes for the Transcontinental Railroad. The actual building of the railroad would have to wait even longer, as the North-South tensions prevented Congress from reaching an agreement on where the line would begin. 1 year into the Civil War, a Republican-controlled Congress passed the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, guaranteeing public land grants and loans to the two railroads it chose to build the transcontinental line. Those two were Union Pacific and Central Pacific. With these in hand, the railroads began work in 1866 from Omaha and Sacramento, forging a northern route across the country. In their eagerness for land, the two lines built right past each other, and the final meeting place had to be renegotiated. Awesome. Harsh winters, staggering summer heat, and the lawless rough and tumble conditions of newly settled western towns made conditions for Union Pacific laborers, mainly Civil War veterans of Irish descent, miserable. The overwhelmingly immigrant Chinese workforce of the Central Pacific also had its fair share of problems, including brutal 12-hour workdays laying tracks over the Sierra Nevada mountains. They also received lower wages than their white counterparts. On more than one occasion, whole crews would be lost to avalanches, or mishaps with explosives would result in several continuances of eternity. For all the adversity they suffered, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific workers were able to finish the railroad laying nearly 2,000 miles of track by 1869, ahead of schedule and under budget. Journeys that had taken months by wagon train or weeks by boat now took only days. Their work had an immediate impact. The years following the construction of the railway were years of rapid growth and expansion for our nation, due in large part to the speed and ease of travel that the railroad provided. On May 10th in 1994, in South Africa, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela is sworn in as the first black president. In his inaugural address, Mandela, who spent 27 years of his life as a political prisoner of the South African government, declared that the time for the healing of the wounds has come. 2 weeks earlier, more than 22 million South Africans had turned out to cast ballots in the country's first ever multiracial parliamentary elections. An overwhelming majority chose Mandela and his African National Congress ANC party to lead the country. Mandela, born in 1918, was the son of the chief of the Xhosa-speaking Tembu people. Instead of succeeding his father as chief, Mandela went to a university and became a lawyer. In 1944, he joined the African National Congress, ANC, a black political organization dedicated to winning rights for the black majority in white-ruled South Africa. In 1948, the racist National Party came to power, and apartheid, South Africa's institutionalized system of white supremacy and racial segregation, became official government policy. With the loss of black rights under apartheid, black enrollment in the ANC rapidly grew. Mandela became one of the ANC's leaders and in 1952 was made deputy national president of the ANC. He organized nonviolent strikes, boycotts, marches, and other acts of civil disobedience. After the Sharpeville incident in 1960, in which several people continued their eternity after being attacked by guards unprovokedly, Nelson helped to organize a paramilitary branch of the ANC to engage in acts of sabotage against the white minority government. He was tried for and acquitted of treason in 1961, but in 1962 was arrested again for illegally leaving the country. Convicted and sentenced to 5 years at Robben Island Prison, he was put on trial again in 1963 with 7 others on charges of sabotage, treason, and conspiracy. In the celebrated Rivonia trial, named after the suburb of Johannesburg where ANC weapons were found, Mandela eloquently defended his actions. On June 12, 1964, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Mandela spent the first 18 of his 27 years in jail at the brutal Robben Island prison. He was confined to a small cell without a bed or plumbing and was forced to do hard labor in a quarry. He could write and receive a letter once every 6 months, and once a year he was allowed to meet with a visitor for 30 minutes. However, Mandela's resolve remained unbroken, and while remaining the symbolic leader of the anti-apartheid movement, he led a movement of civil disobedience at the prison that coerced South African officials into drastically improving conditions on Robben Island. In 1982, he was moved to Pollsmoor Prison on the mainland, and in 1988 to a cottage where he lived under house arrest. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became South African president and set about dismantling apartheid. De Klerk lifted the ban on the ANC, suspended executions, and on February 11th in 1990, ordered the release of Nelson Mandela. Mandela subsequently led the ANC in its negotiations with the minority government for an end to apartheid and the establishment of a multiracial government. In 1993, Mandela and de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. On April 26, 1994, the country's first free elections were held by Mandela and the ANC, and the National Unity Coalition was formed with de Klerk's National Party and the Zulu's Inkatha Freedom Party. On May 10th, Mandela was inaugurated in a ceremony attended by numerous international dignitaries. As president, Nelson Mandela established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate human rights violations under apartheid and introduced numerous initiatives designed to improve the living standards of South Africa's black population. In 1996, he presided over the enactment of a new South African constitution. Mandela retired from politics in June of 1999 at the age of 80. He was succeeded by President Thabo Mbeki of the ANC, but remained a global advocate for peace and social justice until his continuance of paternity in December of 2013.